Good. I have a lot of fun with my 6-month-old grandson. That's cheering me up a little. And I got my shots done, so
Excellent. Now you can go out and play.
that makes me a lot happier. Let me turn this up a little bit so I can hear you. Can you hear me now? Good.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I have a lot of fun with my 6-month-old
Paul's
grandson. That's cheering me up a little. And I got my shots done, so
Excellent. Now you can go out and play.
that makes me a lot happier. Let me turn this up a little bit so I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Good.
Paul's I'm traveling, so I'm not going to be on video. I'm traveling, so I'm not going to be on video.
Abby,
Good, thanks. How are you?
good, thanks. All right. Well, good evening, all. Welcome to the Growth Planning Committee's meeting, April 6th, 2021. Tonight, we do have a couple of special guests that will provide us a presentation on the resilience-related initiatives in York County. We'll start off as usual with our introduction of members and guests. So I'll introduce our two guests first. We have Abby Sherwin and Karina Grader. I'm Dan Saunders, Chair. Warner.
Warner Gilliam.
Jim Fitzgerald.
Paul Hogan's here.
Excellent. Paul. Thought I saw Mike. Yeah, there's Mike.
Mike Corsi.
Excellent. How you doing, Mike? All right. And then Tom and Liz.
Tom, Morgan.
Miss Durfee.
Okay. Anyone we miss? As I noted earlier, Janet was not able to attend this evening, so I'll take some notes for the sake of the minutes. Okay, so that gets to our presentation. So Abby, Karina, I'll pass the ball to you guys.
Thank you. We do have a PowerPoint, so I'm going to share my screen if that's all right, so I can bring that up, but I don't have permission to do so yet.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Oh, yep, all set. Okay. Is everyone seeing that all right?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, hi everyone. Thank you for having Karina and I. I'm Abby Sherwin. I'm Senior Planner and Coastal Resilience Coordinator with Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission, and I'll let Karina introduce herself as well before we get started.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay now? Is it any better?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Hi, I'm Karina Grader. I'm the Sustainability Coordinator with Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission.
Great. So thanks again for inviting Karina and I to speak with you all tonight. We're going to give an overview about our work through the Regional Sustainability and Resilience Program that's housed within SMPDC, of which Kennebunkport is an active member. So just some background information about SMPDC to begin with, for folks who might not be familiar with our organization. We're a regional planning organization serving 39 member municipalities in southern Maine. The organization was established back in 1964 for the purpose of assisting local municipalities strengthen local government, leverage resources, advocate on behalf of communities, and work on addressing regional priority issues. And our organization focuses on land use issues, economic development, transportation planning, and more recently, sustainability and resilience. So in 2019, 6 coastal communities in York County banded together along with SMPDC to establish this regional sustainability and resilience program. And we were established as a 2-year pilot program, and each of the 6 participating communities, which include Kennebunkport, Kennebunk, Wells, Agunquit, York, and Kittery, contributed funding to establish the program and also bring a sustainability coordinator on board. So Karina was hired and started in February of 2020. Which is when the program really kicked off. So we just had our 1-year program anniversary. And the overall mission of the program is working to foster more sustainable and resilient communities in coastal York County by leveraging regional collaboration to enhance the effectiveness of local government sustainability and resilience action. So we are going to go through sort of the overarching objectives of the program and then highlight some of the projects that we've been working on over the past year and what we're going to continue working on in the coming year. And I'll hand it over to Karina to talk a bit about some definitions that we'll be using tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Abby. before we dug into the details of the program, we did want to take a minute to define what we mean when we say sustainability and resilience, because lots of different definitions are thrown out there. But for the purpose of our program, we define sustainability as when a healthy environment, economic prosperity, and social justice are pursued simultaneously to ensure the well-being and quality of life of present and future generations. So those are really the three pillars of sustainability that we think about when doing the work on our program. Next slide. And then our program is about resilience in general, but since we're a coastal region, we think specifically about coastal resilience. And that's specifically resilience to disasters and events arising from coastal hazards, such as sea level rise, increased flooding, more frequent and intense storm surges, and shoreline erosion. And so that coastal resilience can be achieved when we minimize vulnerabilities to coastal hazards through adaptation and mitigation planning. Next slide. And then also that those ideas of coastal resilience and sustainability really reach to this overarching goal of building community resilience, which is the capacity of a community to absorb, withstand, recover from, and adapt to changing conditions in general and disturbances while sustaining their key functions, structures, and performance. So it really involves all those dimensions of a system that we've already covered, those social, built, and natural environments within each of our communities in our region. Next slide. So for our program, we took some time when we established it last year to set some overarching goals for the program. We had a really ambitious 2-year pilot period, so we wanted to make sure that all of the work we were doing aligns with these goals and the priorities for the communities. So the first program goal is collaboration. It's to create a collaborative network to share knowledge and coordinate efforts on sustainability and resilience in coastal York County. Our second program goal is assessment. So to assist with the evaluation of climate change and coastal issues, priority needs for addressing impacts, and periodic progress on sustainability and resilience initiatives. The third program goal is integration. So supporting communities with incorporating sustainability and resilience into community operations, culture, planning, and decision making. And then the last program goal is action. Increasing community resilience of coastal York County by coordinating climate change mitigation and adaptation planning and strategy implementation. So really getting from the planning, the assessing, and into real action in our communities. So for those goals that are kind of broad and overarching, we set also 6 2-year pilot objectives. So things we wanted to be able to achieve in our 2-year period. The first pilot objective was to establish a baseline of sustainability and resilience efforts and needs in our individual communities and the whole region. And for that objective, we've done a number of different activities and initiatives. The first is that we completed a general sustainability and coastal resilience framework that we could use to evaluate each of the 6 communities on their progress to date and their priority issues in the future on this work. And then we use that framework to conduct individual town assessments of past, ongoing, and priority future efforts on sustainability. So we produced an assessment for each town, and we'll show you a little bit of Kennebunkport's assessment later. And then we use those individual town assessments to produce a regional sustainability and coastal resilience report called Getting There From Here, that identifies the priority needs for all of our towns as a region and how us as a regional entity might be able to help support those goals and those actions. And we'll get into that a bit more later as well. The second pilot objective was to enhance intercommunity communication and collaboration on sustainability and resilience efforts. And so to reach that objective, we've established some sort of ongoing communication strategies. The first is that we have bi-monthly program meetings with the town managers and other town contacts that we directly work with in each of the 6 communities. We also produce a bi-monthly newsletter that we send out via email, updating anyone interested on the progress of our program and what we're working on and what our communities are working on. We've also held a number of virtual workshops on priority topics, including municipal solar, incorporating electric vehicles into municipal fleets, and the newly released Maine Climate Action Plan. And then our last sort of communication initiative is that we are holding forums every couple of months with the chairs of the different sustainability and resilience related committees in the towns. So really getting the committees who do a lot of this work talking to one another and letting each other know what is happening throughout the region and where they might be able to collaborate or share best practices. Next slide. So the next pilot objective is to help each community develop the capacity to complete a community-wide greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So this really came out of a priority of a lot of our town contacts saying they really wanted to be able to have community-wide inventories of greenhouse gas emissions to be able to plan for the future. And so part of this work has been supporting towns that are currently undertaking that effort by providing technical assistance, as in the case of Kennebunk and York. But for the other towns who aren't yet doing community-wide greenhouse gas inventories, we're developing a standardized framework that those towns can use and that we can help those towns use to conduct the community-wide greenhouse gas inventory based on our experiences working with the other towns, Kennebunk and York, on theirs. And then as part of that process, we are using our regional strength and assistance to do data collection for all of the 6 towns at the same time. It's sort of hard for each town to go to CMP and ask for a year's worth of electricity data, but if we do it all at once for all the towns together, it's a bit easier and streamlines the process. So that work is currently ongoing with the hope that the framework and some of the regional-wide data collection will be completed by the end of this spring. Now I'll turn it over to Abby to go through the last few objectives.
Thanks, Karina. Yep, so those were the first 3 objectives. So I'm going to go through the remaining 3 objectives now. So the 4th objective is to help the program towns expand low carbon transportation through the pursuit of alternative transportation vehicles and EV charging infrastructure. So we've been working with some regional partners as well as the towns to develop a municipal EV readiness toolkit that would provide guidance and resources for towns wanting to expand EV infrastructure and support expanded alternative transportation vehicles in their town. And we're also an active participant in the Maine Clean Communities Coalition and Drive Electric Maine. And we've been coordinating quite a bit with those groups to ensure that what we're doing matches up with statewide efforts, and also trying to build off of the recommendations of the recently released state climate action plan that relate to EV charging infrastructure and electrification of the transportation sector. The 5th objective is to assist our towns with evaluating coastal hazards and related impacts in individual municipalities as well as the region as a whole. So we have a number of ongoing projects related to coastal issues. We'll be diving into a few in more detail at the end of the presentation. But overall, we are assisting the communities with conducting some baseline vulnerability assessments, looking at impacts of coastal flooding and sea level rise, and what the likely impacts are going to be within each of the communities in terms of municipal assets that are going to be impacted, as well as the assessed value of properties that are going to be impacted. And then use that information to assist communities with developing specific strategies and policies that can be implemented to help reduce vulnerability and enhance coastal resilience community-wide and region-wide. And we're also assisting communities with pursuing external funding for assessing additional climate impacts in the coastal area. So working pretty closely with town staff, including Werner, to identify other opportunities that we could tap into to expand our coastal related work. The sixth objective is to support towns and the region with implementation of sustainability and coastal resilience strategies and projects. So this objective really relates to taking all of the information that we're gathering through our assessment phase and helping the towns actually implement and take action on the findings because we want to make a tangible difference in our communities in terms of sustainability and coastal resilience work. So we've worked with Lori and the select board in Kennebunkport to develop some initial climate change goals for the town to consider and also pursue in future planning initiatives. Also working with the town of Wells on a RFP process for acquiring solar for the municipality. And then also we've established the Southern Maine Solar Collaborative, through which we're working with a group of communities to acquire a regional solar bid for offsetting electricity use for municipalities. And that process is ongoing. And I will turn it back over to Karina to talk a bit about our regional and town-specific sustainability and coastal resilience assessment work.
Thanks. Yeah, we figured we would dig into this a little bit more since we're with the Growth Planning Committee and we're thinking about, you know, what the future is for Kennebunkport. And these two analyses, the individual town assessment and the regional assessment, will certainly be helpful documents for you all to look into and see if it has any valuable information to inform your efforts. First, the regional assessment is really focused on comparing the action of the 6 towns on different sustainability and resilience categories, from climate to energy use, but also land ecosystems, water, coastal hazards. You know, it really runs the whole gambit of the ways that towns can work on sustainability and resilience. And it digs into where the towns have made progress and why, and where the towns have not been able to make as much progress and why that might be too, whether it's a local challenge or something that maybe is a regional or statewide challenge for municipalities to face. So it really has a lot of wealth of information. And then at the end of it, we sort of look into how our regional organization or any regional effort could advance municipal action individually. And that's through kind of how our program has been set up, of providing coordination, helping with analysis, and then providing technical assistance to our communities. Next slide. But for the town of Kennebunkport, we just kind of wanted to show you what some of the data in these reports look like. I know it's really small, but over on the left is the sort of summary of all the evaluations we did for the town of Kennebunkport. So for each town, we looked at 12 different sustainability and resilience related categories. And then within each category, we established 18 indicators of progress to try and standardize our assessment of the towns across the entire region. And then for each indicator, based on the actions that a town has taken related to that indicator, we provided a sort of qualitative status of where the town is on that action. So for example, in Kennebunkport, the first indicator under climate is establish a greenhouse gas emissions inventory, target, and plan. And for Kennebunkport, we put that as getting started because you have conducted a municipal greenhouse gas emissions inventory about 2 years ago, but have yet to do a community-wide one and have yet to use that to establish any emissions reduction targets. So on the path forward, but still lots of progress to be made. And so we use those sorts of indicators and general statuses to compare the progress across the different towns. And that's what you see on the little graphics on the right. Is we use these graphics to show where each town was on those statuses in relation to one another. So again, with the climate, establish a greenhouse gas emissions inventory, target, and plan. Kennebunkport is in the getting started phase. Kenny Bunk, who has done a community-wide greenhouse gas emissions inventory and is in the process of developing a climate action plan, is in making progress. And in York, they've already established greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets, and they are in the process of a climate action planning effort right now. So they're the farthest along, whereas Algonquin and Wells haven't yet really started working on this sort of effort, but they are interested in it. So we do that for all of the indicators. So it really, there's a lot of information there, and I would recommend, if you're interested, to look at those plans, and we're happy to share them with you, or you can find them on our website under the Sustainability and Resilience page. Next slide. And then I also wanted to go into a bit more detail about the Southern Maine Solar Collaborative, because if you're unaware, this is something that Kennebunkport is participating in. So back in 2019, the state of Maine passed the Net Energy Billing Program, and the law that started the Net Energy Billing Program that allows municipal and industrial customers to participate in solar net energy billing. So a solar array could be anywhere within CMP's territory in Kennebunkport, or it could be in Waterboro or Bridgeton. But if the solar farm is generating electricity, then Kennebunkport can pay to own the rights to that electricity and the renewable energy credits that go with it. But it's very complicated and a new system, and there were a bunch of different solar developers approaching our towns, and with different offers and different explanations for why they should join. So since we've long had a history of doing collaborative procurement at SMPDC for things like road salt or paint for roadways, we thought it would be a great idea to use our collaborative purchasing power to help our towns participate in that energy billing program. And Kennebunkport was really one of the leaders in this. So right now we have a group of 6 towns, which is slightly confusingly different than our 6-town regional pilot program group, but it does include Kennebunkport, Algonquin, Kittery, and then it also includes Waterboro, Freiburg, and Old Orchard Beach. And we have a request for proposals out for one solar developer to help these 6 towns join the net energy billing program, to all have the same contract, the same terms, and be able to participate, hopefully, from the same solar farm together. So it's a really great project, and it's the first in the state doing this. And the goal is to get better pricing options for municipalities, and also to take some of the workload off of the municipal staff or committee members who would otherwise have to do all this, the RFP writing and publishing and management, and use our regional organization as the basis for that. And then it also is a great opportunity for the towns to engage in peer learning and support in this new program that we're all sort of learning about and discovering how it works as we go along. Next slide.
A quick question on that.
Yeah.
Is that something that would become available to the town residents as well, or is it just for the municipality?
Yeah, so this program is specifically for the municipalities' electricity use. Residents can participate in community solar programs, but right now it's just you have to, contact the developer, the marketing company that is reaching out to you. However, I've had a lot of people ask about, residential community solar, so it is something we are thinking about would be a good opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then Abby, you want to finish this up?
Yeah, thanks, Karina. I'm going to talk a bit about some of the ongoing sea level rise and coastal resilience related projects that we're leading. So I mentioned that we have multiple grant projects that are tackling some of the most pressing coastal issues that our region's facing. One of which is a grant that's funded through the Economic Development Administration that involves the 6 program towns. So Kennebunkport is a part of this project. And we're working with an environmental economist and a GIS consulting firm to conduct a GIS-based vulnerability assessment, looking at the impacts of different scenarios of sea level rise and coastal flood hazards, and evaluating what is going to be impacted and to what extent in each of the 6 towns. So we're looking at impacts to private property and the values of those properties, looking at impacts to municipal infrastructure, and also looking at impacts to population and demographic information. And then utilizing all of that information to develop locally tailored strategies to address flood vulnerability for each of the towns. So developing things like policy measures, land use strategies, funding mechanisms, and also some sort of big picture flood mitigation projects that the towns might want to consider for addressing vulnerabilities to existing flooding as well as future sea level rise. And then part of those grant related projects also are focusing on economic resilience of individual municipalities as well as the region as a whole. So really looking at what the impacts of sea level rise and coastal flooding could be to our regional economy, especially our tourism economy, and doing some resilience planning for storm hazards for businesses that are going to be impacted by flood hazards. We're also developing some model ordinance language that municipalities might want to consider integrating into their land use regulations. Things like requiring structures to be elevated a few feet higher than they currently are to account for flood hazards, and a number of other sort of land use provisions. And we also have another region-wide project that involves all of our coastal communities. So beyond just the 6 program communities, that is funded through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation that is working to develop a regional coastal resilience plan. So assessing a range of coastal hazard impacts to our region and identifying sort of the most vulnerable areas of our region and developing specific projects for addressing those vulnerabilities region-wide. And then we also just wanted to mention some of the other sort of big picture work that we are focusing on. And this applies to not only our regional program, but SMPDC as a whole. So we're really trying to focus on integrating climate change considerations, sustainability principles, and resilience planning in all of our work. Which includes focusing on how we can better integrate climate change information into land use practices, assist municipalities with incorporating this type of information into the comprehensive planning process, hosting training events to fill information gaps or data needs within our communities for pursuing action on climate and sustainability work, providing technical assistance and also linking up our municipalities with experts at the state and regional level when necessary. And an example of this is we recently held a webinar last week on the state climate action plan and also the statewide assessment of what Maine can reasonably expect to experience in terms of climate change impacts and what it all means for municipal-based planning. And then we're also sort of actively participating in the Maine Climate Council process on the Community Resilience, Public Health, and Emergency Management Working Group. So trying to stay plugged into statewide efforts on climate change so that we can bring that information back to our communities, but also share the needs and work of our communities at the state level. So that is the information. The contact information for both myself and Karina, and we are happy to talk about our work anytime. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We also have a lot of this information on our website under the Sustainability and Resilience Project tab. And then as Karina mentioned, we also have a bi-monthly newsletter where we try to summarize a lot of the work that we're doing and highlight some of the projects that are going on in our program towns. So that is the end of our presentation. So we're happy to answer questions or however you'd like to do this.
All right. Well,
Do
Thank-
you have any connection with the Maine Municipal Association? And because you're only covering a small part of the coast, and it would be great. There's a lot of coastline in Maine, so
There certainly is. And yes, SMPDC is tapped into the Maine Municipal Association network. And we are frequently working with partners across the state and up and down the coastline to ensure that our efforts are sort of coordinated and that we're leveraging resources not only within our own region, but with neighboring regions as well.
excellent.
thanks. That was a lot of information. And a lot of very good actions you guys are doing on these projects. So after a year, how do you feel things are going? I mean, it seems like you got a really good foundation of the things you want to work on and have been working on. Has it met your guys' expectation as to where you'd been so far?
I think it's met mine. I think my expectation was sort of a moving target and just hoping to, band together and really take a regional approach to some of these really tough and challenging issues. And I think we've been able to accomplish that. And I feel like we've also been able to focus in on some of the priority needs for individual towns and see where those needs overlap and start to bring in external resources to help the towns move forward with action. And then doing that all in a COVID world has been
Sure.
interesting. So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Have you done anything that created a real kind of shock to you that, oh my God, never knew this existed, or how are we ever going to deal with something like this, or anything like that in your year so far?
I think the one, I wouldn't say it's a shock to us, but the one project that has been really surprising has been that Southern Maine Solar Collaborative project. When we started, it was not a project we had planned on or one we were even aware of possibly doing. And I've had to sort of start it from scratch, but to get to Daniel's question about if it's met our expectations, I think the one thing that has sort of gone beyond our expectations is projects like that, where the towns are really game to work together and collaborate. I came from a world not of municipal work, but from the university system. And one of the people warned me that getting towns to work together could sometimes be a tough sell. But I think this world of sustainability and climate change has really amped up folks' desire to work together because we realize that we really can achieve more working collaboratively. So projects like that have both been a surprise and something really rewarding to be a part of.
Oh, thanks.
Good. Who'd you say were the other three? It was Kennebunkport, Gunkwit, and Kittery that are in the solar. Then you said three others. Watertown. Who are the other two?
Waterboro.
Waterboro.
Yeah, it's Waterboro, Freiburg, and Old Orchard
Okay.
Beach.
Great. Thank you. So is the plan to expand this to the rest of the region that you control? Or that you support already? Not control, support? What's the step forward?
yeah, that's a great question. So we are at SMPDC as a whole is trying to focus more on integrating climate work in everything that we do. And then we are, having discussions within the office of how can we expand this program because, I think that other communities have expressed interest in it and the work that we're doing. And so we're trying to figure out how we can bring in other communities and expand the work to our broader region.
Okay.
We don't yet have a plan for that moving forward, though.
Because you really have the coastal towns, other than Biddeford and Old Orchard Beach, right? and Saco.
Yes, yep.
One of the things that I think spurred this on in the beginning was, this knowledge that, that we knew that communities were working on, on sustainability and climate action goals. But one of the things that we realized is that there are numerous different ways to approach it. There's numerous different metrics in terms of how things could get measured. And, there are all different sorts of directions that communities could head. And I think what one of the biggest things is that, all of the individual communities really did express an interest in being, to some degree consistent with each other and talking the same language, in terms of, whether it was measuring greenhouse gases or, or understanding, vulnerability, and just how that was being done. And so, having SMPDC, be the, what I'd say kind of the center of that hub has been really helpful, because otherwise, for the individual communities to try to coordinate that with each other individually, I just think would be a bit of a mess, and just it would be well intentioned, but I think we'd be missing the mark with each other all the time, and so this just made a lot of sense, to have them be kind of the hub, of that, of the information, the standards, and with the coordination of these different projects.
Yep.
Abby, I like the photograph of Dock Square with the Red House getting kind of close to the water. Any thoughts on how to deal with Dock Square in an era of a rising sea?
That is an excellent question, and I think it's one that Werner has been working on diligently for a while. I'm hoping that the vulnerability assessment work that we're doing, and the development of resilience and adaptation strategies will hopefully come up with some good options for consideration about what could be done in that area. But that one is a very tricky situation.
It is, man.
Yeah, Abby, so we did, I spoke with growth planning, a couple of weeks ago, just a little bit about the Silver Jackets proposal.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And so they're aware of, that's out there, and that, that we've applied for that, and that hopefully we'll get some, some good, we'll get some great minds that'll get together, to come up with some good strategies and goals that we can present to those property owners and those business owners, down in Dock Square and Lower Village. So, because it's a tricky animal, how do you deal with, floodplain development in an area where you've got this, tight streetscape? It's a bit of a challenge, and also still keep it, try to keep it consistent with, the historic nature of what you have. So stay tuned.
Okay. Any other questions for Abby or Karina?
I have just a quick question.
Sure.
What's the timeline for your vulnerability assessments?
That's a great question. So we have been delayed by COVID. We are getting up and running with that work now, with the actual GIS-based assessment work. And so we are hoping to have some end products that we can present to the communities for feedback and input over the summer. And then the regional plan will be released in December of this year. But I will say that there was a very similar project done for 3 of the program towns, not including Kennebunkport, but Kennebunk, Wells, and York, which we're taking that methodology and just expanding it to the 6-town group. So if folks are interested in getting a sense of what type of information is going to be generated from that vulnerability assessment effort, there are reports from the first project on SMPDC's website, and it's called the Tides, Taxes, and New Tactics Project.
Great, thanks.
And what about the EV toolkit? When is the publication date for that?
Yeah, so we're hoping to have that up and running this summer. I didn't go into detail here, but it will both have like an assessment that we can help towns with doing a pretty simple assessment of how EV ready are they. And it's not just about municipal fleets, it's also about like zoning, permitting, other land use regulations that towns can work on to adapt to the growing number of electric vehicles that are going to be in our communities. And then it will also have a bunch of guidance documents and resources. So the idea is for it to be like an online toolkit that will be really interactive. And for our regional program, my plan is to test out the assessment on our 6 communities. So I will be taking Kennebunkport through that EV readiness assessment.
So Kennebunkport would be like a guinea pig then.
Yeah.
Good.
And I just have one other question. Do any of the projects or efforts that you're working on specifically target maybe actions or recommendations that you would like to see municipalities include in their comprehensive plans? Or do any of the indicators, would you flag any of the indicators that you evaluate in your, I think you call it getting there from here report? Would you be looking to municipalities to use that as a resource for including some steps in their comprehensive plans?
Yes, definitely that is part of the indicators. I'm like totally blanking on the exact wording of ones, but they're certainly like one of the indicators is like how much has the municipal government incorporated like climate change and sustainability considerations into their like long-term comprehensive planning process. But certainly a lot of the indicators themselves could be used to inform specific goals or objectives within the comprehensive plan as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we did work with the town on setting their interest in we did work with the town in completing that community-wide, the single individual community assessment. So those sort of actions could potentially be used to inform the goals as well for the specific town.
I think Liz, I think one question that for both you and Tom that that we can bring up that would maybe be good to get some feedback from Corinna and Abby on is, so growth, with growth planning working on the comp plan update, what is it that that the town should have within its comp plan as far as supportive language to to make sure that the efforts that we've been that we've been working on here continue to get supported, because I know this is we're very, this is somewhat of a parallel, it's parallel. It's something that that didn't necessarily come out of the current comp plan, but definitely something that we want to make sure we've got supportive language in the plan moving forward, as this current one is being developed.
Yeah, absolutely. You could see where there could be an impact on maybe some of the strategies that we develop that would need to be tweaked or something based on the output of some of this work.
Right.
And how do we, right. And so how do we make it flexible enough so that we have to resubmit it 2 or 3 years later or 4 years later?
Right. Yeah. And I guess that's my point. We want to make sure that the language in the plan is, is broad, is broad enough that it supports, that it supports the efforts of what's currently ongoing, and such that, that we don't get hamstrung by something so specific that, that it doesn't give us the flexibility to pivot, into different directions if needed. I just want to make sure that we've got, as we look for grant opportunities and things like that, that the language, is supportive and consistent.
Werner, I think one thing that's encouraging along those lines is both Liz and I and Abby and Karina are all paying close attention to the Maine Climate Council and the Maine Won't Wait. So all four of us are kind of looking there for, the clues of what's around the corner. So it's likely that we're the four of us are going to be, going in the same direction.
And I think we'll definitely want to reference these ongoing regional projects, and some of them already are referenced in the comp plan. But I think that's one way to make sure that that this work is recognized. And we're going to be working on developing the strategies throughout this summer and into fall. And so we could check back and see kind of what progress has been made, and touch base with Karina and Abby to see if there's additional information that we should be aware of to help make sure that the comp plan is kind of consistent and moving in the same direction as the findings or preliminary findings from some of the projects that the Southern Maine is working on too.
Yeah, that makes sense. An evolving landscape. Yeah, good. Okay, any other questions? All right. So thank you very much for the presentation. I know it was informative for us on the GPC, and hopefully it's informative for those who are watching or will watch in the future. So thank you, Abby, and thank you, Karina.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you both.
So Maine Won't Wait discussion. Local implications for Maine's new climate action plan.
So I will kick this off. I'm going to share my screen. All right, does everyone see PowerPoint?
Yes.
Where did you guys go? Oh, you're down here now. Do you see the presentation mode? Or do you see a slideshow mode here?
Yeah, it's not the presentation mode. I see all the slides on the left.
Yeah.
The Maine Won't Wait.
Let me just unplug my other monitor here. One second.
Yeah, I had a moment a little while ago where I lost you all, and it was fun trying to find where everybody went.
You lost us in Zoom land.
Right, I could hear everything. I was like, wait a minute.
That happens to me a lot when I'm sharing my screen.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just start off with just a pretty quick overview of some of the science, really high level science that came out of the Maine Won't Wait, and the scientific assessment of climate change and its effects in Maine, which was part of this overall effort to create the Maine Climate Council State Climate Action Plan, which I know we've mentioned before, but since Tom and I have gone over some climate data in the past, we've incorporated some into sections of the comprehensive plan. We've presented some sort of basic climate science. We've heard from Dr. Cameron Wake, what seems like forever ago now, and included certain sets of climate data in the plan. We're going to relook at some of the data we have included and update it and make sure that what we've included is straight out of what this resource for the state of Maine is including and recommending as far as the science and some of the policies and recommendations, just to make sure that Kennebunkport's plan is consistent with the state data. So I think most of what I'm going to try to cover this pretty quickly. So I want to make sure we save time for Tom's portion, who he's going to talk about more about the policy and the recommendations and some of the implications for the comprehensive plan that we just want to highlight. And then we do have a few mini survey questions that we want to get to also. So feel free to interrupt if you have questions. Obviously, I'm not one of the authors of this report, but I'll do my best to answer any or point you towards sections of it. So we're going to start out with, I'm going to start out with first what the science tells us about some of the challenges that we're going to face due to climate change. Tom's going to talk about the 4 goals of the Maine Climate Council in the State Climate Action Plan, as well as the 8 strategies that are proposed by the Climate Council and what that means for Kennebunkport and specifically the comprehensive plan. So, oops, let me just move this bar out of my way here. So I have included on the screen here the 5 main key findings that came out of this scientific assessment. And this report was written by over 50 authors, which is pretty impressive. I can't imagine the coordination that went into putting that together. The findings of the report have been used to inform ongoing deliberations of the Maine Climate Council, and they, of course, helped inform the strategies that are in Maine Won't Wait. These are the 5 key takeaways: a summary of climate change's impacts across the state and to Maine's human and animal health, economy, and forest and agriculture systems, sea level rise projections to 2100, an initial estimate of the contribution of Maine's forests to the state's annual carbon budget, identification of priority information and data gaps about conditions in or for Maine, and identification of methods to build resilience to direct and indirect effects of climate change for the state's species. We've talked about temperature projections. So I included a graph from the report here and just a couple bullet points to highlight some of the sort of key findings related to temperature, what we've observed as well as what is projected. Statewide, the annual temperature has increased by 3.2 degrees Fahrenheit since 1895. And it's anticipated that temperature will increase by 2 to 4 degrees, an additional 2 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit by 2050, relative to a baseline of 2001 to 2018 temperatures. And the amount of temperature change that does occur will depend primarily on greenhouse gas emissions and development. It's also projected that temperature may increase by up to 10 degrees Fahrenheit by 2100. There are seasonal differences that have been recognized. Winters are warming faster than other seasons, and coastal areas are also warming faster than some of the inland areas. There we go. Precipitation is something we've also talked about. I think we have recognized that there have been more frequent and larger storm events. This trend is projected to continue. The state has experienced an increase in the average number of heavy precipitation events per year, particularly since the mid 2000s. And since 1985, annual precipitation has increased by 6 inches. Again, there are seasonal differences with increased rainfall in summer and early fall driving the annual increase in precipitation. And the state will continue to get wetter over the next century. And as I know Tom has pointed out many times before, although we have climate change projections through the end of the century, sea level rise and precipitation and temperature changes are not anticipated to stop at the year 2100. Sea level rise, we've looked at sea level rise maps. We have been using a set of sea level rise data that is consistent with the Maine Climate Action Plan. We talked a little bit about the sea level rise scenarios at I believe our last meeting when we covered the hazards chapter. So the technical report includes information on what has already occurred. The coast has risen about 0.6 to 0.7 feet per century over the last century, with a lot of that occurring much more recently. And there's also been episodes of abrupt sea level rise that have occurred during several months, such as in 2009 and 2011. Increasing sea level rise will lead to a 1 foot increase in sea level rise will lead to a 15-fold increase in the frequency of nuisance or sunny day flooding that the town is already experiencing in some locations. And as sea level rise does occur, coastal beaches, dunes, salt marshes, and bluffs are likely to experience increased erosion, landward movement, land loss, and sediment redistribution. Last time we talked about what the scientific and technical subcommittee has recommended in terms of adopting a scenario-based approach for sea level rise, and that was committing to manage for 1.5 feet of sea level rise by 2050 and 3.9 feet by 2100, and then preparing to manage for 3 feet of sea level rise by 2050 and 8.8 feet by 2100 for particularly for your critical infrastructure where you can't tolerate as much risk of flooding. We talked about some of the projections at our last meeting as well. 3 to 5 feet of sea level rise by the end of the century, with more possible. Oops. And then here's just one of the graphs that I wanted to pull up quickly from the report. There's a lot of great graphs and charts in the science document if you're interested in poking around more. This one has the potential sea level rise scenarios for Portland, Maine specifically, and you can see that 3.9, which is considered an intermediate scenario right in the middle there in red. Ocean temperature, we didn't talk about too much, but ocean temperature is a concern, particularly for coastal communities that rely on fisheries. Recent warming has caused considerable variability in the Gulf of Maine temperatures, but under all of the scenarios, the Gulf of Maine will continue to warm through at least 2050. And then beyond 2050, the warming rate depends on, again, on the emissions scenario. This chart shows temperature change over the last century, and then some projections for how much the temperature could potentially change out through close to the end of the century. Ocean acidification, another topic we didn't talk too much about, but we have talked a lot on the importance of the lobster industry, and certainly ocean acidification has an impact on fisheries, on shellfish, their ability to grow their shells. And something that is covered in the report. This diagram here isn't from the report. It's an EPA diagram, but I thought it nicely illustrates sort of how ocean acidification occurs as a result of increased CO2 in the atmosphere. That's absorbed by the ocean and changes the pH of the water, and as I mentioned, negatively impacts shellfish in particular. The rate of ocean acidification that has occurred is at least 100 times faster now than at any other time in the last 200,000 years. This slide, I know it says hydrology and there's a picture of a horse on it. Oops, there it goes. But I just wanted to highlight one of the changes related to hydrology is the impact on winter precipitation, snowfall, as well as flooding, which we have talked about. So we've talked about how annual floods have increased in volume in rivers and streams over the last century. Heavy and more frequent precipitation events have been documented. Changes in winter precipitation have occurred and are projected to continue. Ice out dates have occurred earlier. Snowpack depths have decreased. And I included this picture that is from Rockin' Horse Stables, which I actually saw some folks out on a sleigh ride, I think last year when I was up in Kennebunkport, which was kind of cool to see. But this was from a Connecticut magazine, and it was featuring Kennebunkport as a popular winter tourist destination. So one of the impacts of changes to the hydrological system and our winter precipitation will trickle down to winter tourism too. Freshwater quality, we touched on water quality in our water resources and marine resources chapters. Surface temperatures in lakes in northern New England have experienced a 1.4 degree Fahrenheit change per decade since around 1984, which really isn't that long ago. And this has changed the amount of dissolved organic carbon in rivers, streams, and lakes, and in the Gulf of Mexico, and more, the Gulf of Maine. We're not in Mexico. And then more intense rainfalls will also have some pretty big implications for stormwater management, both the sizing and capacity of stormwater systems that your commercial developers will need to consider, and then also the amount of nutrients that are carried into freshwater bodies associated with that greater flow. There are quite a few more topics that I'm not going to get into detail just due to time for our presentation tonight, but there is also some information on in this science section on the sort of impacts of climate change on marine ecosystems, biodiversity, forestry and forest ecosystems, agriculture and food systems, human and animal health, and then Maine's economy and climate change. And I think that when Tom gets into some of the sort of policy pieces that he'll be able to help connect some of the dots between these other areas. And then lastly, as I mentioned, we'll be kind of reviewing what some of the data that we have included so far, at least in our short climate summary piece that we will be including in our introduction to the comprehensive plan, just to make sure we're using consistent data with this resource that's now available. So I guess that's one benefit of project delays due to COVID, is that now we have the opportunity to make sure that your plan is really lines up with the state plan, at least in terms of this resource. And we'll be modifying a few of the maps to make sure that we are clearly showing the projections that the state is recommending that municipalities plan for. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Tom. Tom, do you want me to do slides for you, or do you want to pull it up on your screen?
Let me try my screen.
Okay.
If that works.
Probably easier.
You guys see us? 1, 2, 3, 4 there?
Yep.
Yep, what's up? The
Excellent.
4 goals.
Excellent. We're ready to go then. Yeah, I'd like to reiterate what Liz mentioned. The one irony of the pandemic was that Liz and I we took a break for 6 months, but the Maine Climate Council did not. They kept on churning away, and they caught up with us. So now we're kind of we're much better aligned than we would have been. I mean, the original schedule, Liz and I would have been scrambling to coordinate with the Climate Council policies right at the very end of the project, but now we basically have the rest of this calendar year to get in sync. And the reason it's important to get in sync, and I think Werner touched on it earlier, was you guys will be subject to state regulations, state statutes. You'll be applying for grants, and a lot of the standards and expectations for the grant organizations will be to align your projects with the state policies as articulated in the Climate Action Plan. The council's been around for a better part of 2 years. They wrote this very impressive Climate Action Plan that was published in December. There's a lot of material in there, which we're not going to go through everything tonight, because some of the material is more relevant to Kennebunkport than others. So we're going to focus on some of the things that we think that would be worth paying attention, because I think they'll be quite relevant to town. So, okay, screen came, okay, good, all right. So here's, as Liz mentioned, there are 4 goals. One of them is to reduce the state's greenhouse gas emissions, and they had some specific targets, as you can see. They're fairly ambitious, probably more ambitious than most of the other New England states, but it's probably, just where you need to be if we're going to keep the climate change under some semblance of control. So the targets, as you can see, is 45% reduction. This is compared to 1990, and the target date is 2030, and then by 2050 they're going for 80%. And then carbon neutrality, that's not quite the same as reducing your emissions. That means that you come to a point where you have a civilization that's sequestering as much carbon as it's producing, so you're not adding any to the atmosphere. Second goal is avoid doing nothing, because if you do nothing, the Climate Council plan makes out a pretty compelling case that it's going to be more expensive to do nothing than to take action. And these are some of the impacts if you were to do nothing. You'd have the ticks and mosquitoes would be spreading disease to a greater extent than we've seen to date. Flooding damage will of course, I notice I have one word missing here in the middle. I just noticed it right now. That's not $17.5 in damage, it's $17.5 billion. And of course, it's going to get worse over time, and the bulk of that's going to be sustained on the coast. And then as the sea rises, you'd be losing about half your beaches, When I say beaches, you mean half of your beach sand, or the space of the beach. The beaches will be half the size they are now. Salt marsh, if they can't migrate, they'll get drowned. And the eelgrass is critically important for fish hatcheries, particularly for the ocean species that the fishermen depend on. Third goal is the foster economic opportunity and prosperity. You know, the idea being that there's a silver lining to just investing in climate change measures, and that is it creates a lot of good jobs. The industries that are obvious are solar installation, that's going to grow like crazy. Offshore wind, the Gulf of Maine will be providing, you know, 20 years from now, will be providing the bulk of the electricity for New England and maybe other parts of the Northeast. And then the Climate Council wants to take advantage of some of Maine's natural resources and some of the industrial heritage in the state where there's a lot of skills and knowledge. That is, they're hoping to be innovative with other things you can do with trees that, you know, we haven't seen in the past, but could play an important role in the economy, not just in Maine, but all over the United States. And the fourth goal is when we're doing all this climate work and preparing for a changing climate, make sure that the people with fewer resources and who are living in locations that are particularly vulnerable, that they're not left behind, that everybody gets lifted up with this tide. So those are the four goals. Now, the Climate Council articulated 8 strategies to achieve those 4 goals. The first one is to embrace the transportation sector, and one compelling reason why that should be getting a lot of attention in Maine is because in Maine, it has an unusually high percentage of the greenhouse gas emissions compared to other states. 54% of all of Maine's greenhouse gas emissions are from the transportation sector. And that's mainly because the state is spread out, and of course, our motor vehicles are all, nearly all of them are dependent on fossil fuels. So the strategy is to switch over to electrification, as Abby and Karina mentioned just a few minutes back. And we can count on the car dealers to start manufacturing electric vehicles, but it's up to us, particularly on the local level, to make sure everybody has a place to charge to make this successful, because people aren't going to take the leap if they're not sure they're going to be able to get a charge where they need it and when they need it. Strategy B, modernize the buildings. That's two main techniques here. One is to switch over our heating systems, which in Maine and most of the country are based largely on fossil fuels, and switch them over to electricity. You do that with a couple different technologies. One is heat pumps. Well, actually, in the climate plan, heat pumps is the main approach for electrifying the heating systems. And the other thing they want to do with the buildings is to weatherize them. The heat pump's not going to be as effective if the home isn't tight or the building isn't tight. So there's a lot of work to be done with that. And you can see they've set some specific targets, and the target dates are coming up soon. 2025, they want to see 100,000 new heat pumps in the state and weatherize 17,500 homes. Now, in a few minutes, we'll break that down mathematically to see what how big of a slice of that puzzle is Kennebunkport. You know, what you can expect to look for. If you know, it will give the town a way to measure the town's progress versus the state's goals to see if you're ahead, behind, or right where you should be. Strategy C is to reduce carbon emissions by switching your electrical generation over to renewables. And the target date is by 2030 is to have 80% of the electricity generated in Maine come from renewables. And as I said a few minutes ago, offshore wind has huge potential, and Gulf of Maine is one of the windiest bodies of water in the world. So it has greater potential than many other parts of the planet. Strategy D is grow Maine's clean energy economy. That's to take advantage of your forest products industry. You have a lot of heritage there, and a history of innovation, and you certainly have a lot of forest land to work from. Another strategy is to rely more on local agricultural lands and fisheries for your food. You know, we get most of what we eat and drink from far away, very far away actually. And the strategy is to be less reliant on those distant sources and start to really promote agriculture in the state, more so than it's been done in the past. Strategy E, protecting working lands. Kennebunkport excels in this area, mostly through the efforts of the Kennebunkport Land Trust. You've already protected a lot of land already. The state's goal is to get this 30% of the land in the state of Maine protected by 2030. And with particular focus on those lands that have high biodiversity. And what comes to mind locally are your vernal pools that are near the Bedford line. And then they also, part of the strategy is to incentivize carbon storage, that the providing some type of financial rewards for protecting land as opposed to developing it. Strategy F, build a healthy and resilient community. And that's this particular strategy is where the comprehensive plan is going to play a larger role than the other ones, because this has to, you know, this is relying heavily on changes to your land use codes, your land use policies. You know, at the end of the day, it'll be up to the town whether you want to go there, but the comprehensive plan will recommend a great number of changes to adjust your land use regulations to achieve these policies. As you can see, the Climate Council wants to see a lot of this happening by 2024, so that you're right on schedule there. We'll have a comprehensive plan done before the year is out, and that'll give you a couple of years to make some adjustments to your land use regulations. And then they're also encouraging municipalities to adopt official sea level rise projections, meaning guidelines to guide future development near the water, so that there'll be you won't just be saying to a developer, you know, be careful with sea level rise. You're going to have some specific numbers to throw at them. It says we don't want to see anything built, you know, below a certain elevation, that sort of thing. And then strategy G is to invest in climate-ready infrastructure. The first step is to assess your infrastructure to see how vulnerable it is. And we, you know, Abby and Karina are doing kind of engaged in a lot of work along those lines. So they'll be, with their work products going to be very helpful. And then your response is to, okay, so you've got some vulnerabilities. What can we do to protect it from sea level rise and the effects of climate change? And strategy H, the eighth and final strategy, is to engage with your fellow citizens and you know, work on public education and information so that you can get, you know, a large portion of the public behind these policies. So those are the 8 strategies. What I'm going to speak to next briefly is Liz and I have pulled some of these strategies that we thought were particularly relevant to Kennebunkport and in the town's situation to see how the town would potentially be impacted by these policies that the state is promoting. And we call it aligning the policies with the town's policies with the Climate Council's goals and strategies. Mentioned earlier, the electrification of motor vehicles. You need some infrastructure to charge them. This is you know, a photograph down in New Hampshire of some what were known as fast chargers. These chargers can, they're very powerful. They can charge a vehicle in 1 hour, fully charge it. And the challenge for the town is to figure out, well, where would it make sense to have these banks of chargers? And how many would you need? Would you have them on public property, private? Most likely a combination of the two. in the not too distant future, these are going to be as ubiquitous as gasoline stations. They're just going to look differently, but they'll serve the same basic function. So, the Challenge for Growth Planning Committee is to give some thought as to, all right, where in town does it make sense to make these available? And then the council, the plan recommends expanding the network of bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, with the goal being is to try to get people out on non-polluting vehicles more often and spend less time in motor vehicles. The idea, and that goes back to transportation sector being the greatest emitter of greenhouse gases. So that's one of the strategies, is to get people out of their cars. Heat pumps. We saw before that the state wants to see 100,000 heat pumps installed statewide by 2025. Well, how big of a piece of the puzzle is Kennebunkport? And it's a simple mathematical calculation, which I did. And if Kennebunkport is keeping pace with the state, that would mean you guys would see 300 heat pump installations in the next 4 years. Not sure, Warren, I don't know how many of these you see coming through your office, or if you think this number is realistic, but this is what the state's aiming for. In by a similar fashion, they figure out their weatherization goal is just a mathematical calculation. And if the states are going for 17,000 statewide, that means you'd be looking at 52 of them at Kennebunkport in the next 4 years. The photograph here is, I took it myself. This is a good adventure in our household. The furnace was dying this past January, and so we made the plunge. This is my brand new heat pump being installed in January. And I guess one of the points that I want to make with this photograph is this type of heating system's pretty complicated. And to install it and to service it, you need a well-trained, well-educated workforce. And those people are going to pull down on decent wages. So this is part of your economic future. It's not just, reducing greenhouse gas emissions from your houses, but it's the economic impact this will contribute to the state. It's going to create a lot of good jobs, because these guys obviously know what they're doing. I know I want to know what I'm looking at in that picture. So there's a lot of economic potential right there. And the heat pump, by the way, once they put it back together, it was working great. The state's plan calls for amending building codes to be more relevant in the era that we're fast going into. On the right is just a little segment of a model ordinance from the city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And in this particular ordinance was requiring people to prepare the roofs of new buildings to handle solar panels, make them panel ready right from the get-go. And that's the type of thing that you'll see more and more of. I know the state of California has done that already, and I won't be surprised if the state of Maine goes that way in the next couple of years. And then, of course, making sure that the new buildings are well insulated so you can conserve as much energy as possible. And to utilize the local building materials. Those are the forest products we were talking before about. It's the innovative products that the forest industry is coming up with that are going to be used in place of some of the more conventional building materials like concrete block and steel. Now, remember that the state goal for conserving land is 30%. You guys are almost there. Currently, Kennebunkport is at 24%. And then to reach the state's goal by 2030, you'd have to go out there and protect another 776 acres, which is definitely within reach, given the 9-year target date. And coincidentally or not, just last week, the President of the United States also announced that he had the same conservation goal for the United States. He wants to protect 30% of the land area of the United States by the year 2030. Same exact goal as the state of Maine. Maine announced it earlier. And as I mentioned before, you shouldn't just be going out to get any 776 any 700 acres for conservation, but really take your time and be thoughtful and focus on those land areas that are high in biodiversity, because a lot of species are heading toward extinction and they could use a little help. You recall a few meetings ago, we talked about the 15-minute or the 20-minute neighborhood or a 20-minute town. That's another strategy for reducing the amount of vehicle miles traveled. That's part of the, in this particular diagram on the right, it's based on Paris. It's a little sketch, but I thought it's not too complicated. You get the idea pretty quick. You know, obviously the red line around here is your 15-minute walking or biking distance. These guys out here are too far away, but this works out pretty well for those in the middle. So I'm hoping that the Growth Planning Committee is, you know, revisits this topic and gives some more thought as to what could be done differently in Kennebunkport in terms of future zoning, future land designations to make the town more walkable and more bikeable. So you get people out of their cars more often. Now, we mentioned moments ago that about establishing an official sea level rise standard. These are the standards that the Maine Climate Council recommends. Liz mentioned them too. Liz was talking about, you know, what the projections that are anticipated for sea level rise. But this table here, well, basically says the same thing, but in the middle column here, you got commit to manage. If the building's, you know, not that valuable, it's say it's a 50-year building and it's not inhabited, you'd be looking at these numbers to build to those. If you have critical infrastructure like your sewer pump stations, for example, they have lower risk, and you'd be contemplating these numbers over here on the right. So these numbers on the right, by the way, are pretty challenging to get to. So that's going to be interesting to see how that works out. And here's the Climate Council wants the municipal infrastructure to make sure they meet the climate's recommended standards. You probably recall this map. This is a map of the sewer sheds of Kennebunkport, showing which pump stations are more vulnerable than others, and it helps the residents, I think, visualize just how the system works and where the vulnerabilities are. And then remember, the Climate Council is also encouraging educating the public and informing the public, and I think that Kennebunkport Conservation Trust has done an outstanding job with their recent initiative about climate called what's it called, the Kennebunkport Climate Initiative, and their target audience is young people, but I think it's a great start, and it's certainly aligned with what the Climate Council is endorsing. And then the Climate Council is also, they tell the state of Maine should lead by example, but that goes for municipalities too. We're looking at the Public Works garage in the town of Wells, and you can see what they have on their roof. They're getting quite a bit of power out of that one. And leverage nature-based solutions, another recommendation from the council. This picture here is Charleston, South Carolina. If any of you've been down there, this is over here on the left is the battery. They hired this firm out of Amsterdam to come up with some nature-based solutions to protect them from some of the storm surges that come rolling across Charleston Harbor. And this is of course an illustration of what they're proposing to build or contemplating. Over here on the left is what's called the battery. It's just a big seawall, and the seawall has been breached several times in the last 20 years, and not too good for the houses that are behind it. Charleston has a real challenging situation, but you can see they got the salt marsh grass out here to buffer the surge, and then a breakwater, and then what they call sheltered water. So you got this whole system to to break up the storms and the hurricanes that are coming in from the east and threaten Charleston. But the same principle applies to anywhere along the Atlantic coast. This just happens to be an illustration of one where they've hired this firm out of the Netherlands to come up with a illustration of what it would look like. And my final slide is the Climate Council wants us to make sure we don't encourage anybody to build in areas that are susceptible to climate impacts, sea level rise, for example. If you look carefully, you can see that the tide's out, and if when the tide comes in, it's right up near the grass there. So you got to wonder what these people were thinking when they built that, or at least you got to wonder what the city was thinking. This is South Portland, right near the center of town. And that's it for our report on the Climate Council and the recommendations and what the implications are for Kennebunkport. You guys got any observations, questions, comments?
Do you think we'll
No.
ever see a blip caused by the pandemic and people kind of reversing, like you work out of your house, but you're still burning fossil fuels sometimes? I've got heat pumps, but there's not a lot less travel going on that whole year. You think that's going to show up in the data somewhere?
Yeah, absolutely, and they're encouraging people to do that. Liz and I discovered in our research that Kennebunkport is very well situated in terms of broadband access. You guys are well served. Many towns in the state are not. So that's one of those goals that I didn't mention just now, just because the state's scrambling to get broadband out to as many people as they can, but this doesn't impact you because you're already there. But once you have broadband, you can work from home, and being able to work from home means you're traveling less. So that is definitely part of their goal, but we didn't mention it this evening just simply because you guys got the broadband problem solved.
I think there have been quite a few studies that have documented the sort of temporary, I would say, reduction in the increase of GHG emissions that did occur due to people less transportation related emissions from the pandemic. I don't know any of the numbers off the top of my head, but I believe that there was there were studies that show that emissions did actually decline after, just increasing, for decades. So promising, but very short term, I think.
Yeah.
We'll see. If we all had heat pumps, it would have been a real plus.
Yeah.
Would have been.
So, given what we saw Texas go through, with, the whole electrical grid, issues that they had, I think the push toward heat pumps, in terms of reducing the reliance on, on oil and fossil fuels is a good move. But what are we, hearing kind of state level wise in terms of dealing with CMP and the reliability of the grid and just seeing what Texas, went through, it just, it kind of leads me to this thought process of, or this conclusion that you don't ever put all your eggs in one basket, and reliance on one particular source, isn't necessarily the most prudent thing to do, but, certainly, some, level of diversity across the board is, something to think about. What are you all thinking on that? We're seeing a lot more heat pumps and everything go into houses, just with the, rebates and things like that. And, we're seeing a lot of it incorporated into new construction. But I always get a little bit concerned with, the sole kind of push and reliance on one, on one source there.
And one of the concerns I've had with the heat pumps is just, I mean, a lot of the older homes aren't really designed well for a heat pump, right? They'd have to, because of the if you got a lot of walls, you don't have that open space. Trying to, take care of a second story, 3-bedroom cape or something like that. Each door is closed. How do you get the heat into those rooms? You can't put one central unit in. You got to hit 3 different units. So it gets really expensive if you're going to go to a heat pump. So the other option is to get away from oil is to look at for gas, but the problem there, it's all propane for the most part in the state of Maine. Not a lot of natural gas available, and that certainly doesn't help too much on the climate end.
Plus
So it's
propane
right?
is very expensive
Yeah, propane's expensive. Absolutely.
per BTU, much more expensive than
Yep. Absolutely.
Maine's expensive electricity.
Right.
Well, and the other thing, when you look at you look at what the BTU, output is on oil versus propane too. You get a better bang for your buck on the oil than you do on propane.
Yeah.
Certainly, it's going to burn cleaner, but there's some affordability questions there too.
Sure.
The other thing that that I think we haven't seen it yet, but I think it's going to come up. It's going to come up soon. From what I understand, in the coastal areas, heat pumps have got a shortened lifespan. So you're looking at somewhere in the 12, 15 year lifespan of a heat pump. So a lot of those ones that's first started getting incentives in are going to be up for replacement at some point. Now hopefully they're all going to go in with we know the efficiencies have gotten a lot better over the years, and so that's going to be a plus in that sense, that you'll start to rotate out some of the older, less efficient units. But that's one thing that you're going to see as well. They lifespans on some of these maybe 15 years. Well, you get all kinds of different ranges depending on how folks take care of them, but
right.
That's something that we'll start seeing here shortly, is replacement of those older systems.
Sure. Versus your 40-year boiler, right?
So
when you're looking at it from a cost standpoint, it's very hard at times.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we've got in our house, we've got we got a forced hot air unit that that uses oil, and at the end of the day, I can tune the thing up if I if I needed to, but we supplement that with heat pumps as well, and it works out pretty good from a cost perspective, but
yeah.
Werner, in terms of putting all your eggs in a basket, with the price of battery storage going down, when the power goes out like it did last week, I have battery backup. So I was able to continue my heat pump running, and my refrigerators, key things that I've designed into the system, which I think will become, 10 years from now, 20 years from now.
Yeah.
It's, generators are very expensive and are sitting out there to rust too.
Right.
Like heat pumps and like air conditioning units, which also have short lives. A generator rarely gets used. It gets used an hour a week, except when it's needed for 12 hours or whatever.
Right.
So, a battery pack, a Tesla battery pack in your garage may turn out to be, a cost-effective way to continue to run and have heat when CMP goes down.
Yeah, no, 100%, and so I think, we're only just really, seeing the beginning stages of this, of electric technology coming into, what I would think of as everyday industry, and everyday solutions for residential, construction. Yeah. So, and no doubt in my mind, the market's going to push this stuff to get better and more efficient. and it's going to start to, and it's going to start to become more the norm, than the exception, no doubt.
Yeah.
And,
But you
and
make a
yeah,
good point on the infrastructure there, though. I mean, if you have all EV vehicles and you got heat pumps in homes, and the tree takes out the power line, knocks the whole town out, it's not going to be good for the system. And those will have battery backup and so forth that can survive a while,
but everybody else.
but everybody else. Yep.
I mean, I do think the stronger building codes, while more expensive to build, if you have a 8-inch wall versus a 2x4 wall, and you have triple windows instead of single or double, you can basically go a long time without freezing up. Even without going to passive house standards. So over the life of a house, you save a fortune in heating costs and cooling costs, but you have to have the money up front, unless you find a way to finance it, of course.
Right.
Yeah, it's, there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to that. I think part of it too is, I think as a society, folks have gotten used to this expectation of a certain size house that they have to feel comfortable in, and, it'll be interesting to see kind of as time progresses, that we probably realize that, we've got an awful lot more square footage than we actually need, in terms of house, and comparatively when you look at the rest of the world in terms of how they construct and what they use for square footage.
Yeah.
And the size of Warren has been growing over the last 50 years.
Yeah.
What was normal 50 years ago was quite a bit smaller than what the median is today.
For certain. Yeah, but
Yeah.
I would think it would come down as well. The other issue, though, or the issue we kind of been talking about, is really the existing home stock. That when you're designing new, they're all benefits to put in these systems, right? Because you're already offsetting the old type technology that you would have put in. But then, like I had mentioned with the homes, a lot of the older home stock aren't really designed well for some of these newer technologies. So then you get into, do you modify the home if you can to make it more adaptable, right?
Yeah, it's not an uncommon conversation, that, folks get to a point once they start doing the dollars and cents analysis that, to get the same equivalent in an older house, you wind up spending more, in terms of a renovation cost than you do starting from scratch, which, I mean, we see that happen on a regular basis. At the end of the day, it winds up, and part of that, I think, is to some degree a little bit of an unintended consequence of stricter codes, that, it just costs that much more to retrofit, some of your older structures. But
we just got to sort of balance that as we look forward.
What do you guys think of the climate plan?
Well, I mean, one thing I was thinking about as we were chatting here, I didn't see much in there about, what's the goal to improve the infrastructure of CMP and other utilities. I mean, they're going to be key in delivering power from offshore wind and solar farms to the customer. And there's really nothing in there, or at least what you showed us. I don't know if it's in the details.
That's interesting. I don't recall reading anything in the plan about that. Liz, do you remember anything? I think you're muted.
No, I was just kind of skimming through it right now when that came up. So I'll have to take another look because I don't remember anything off the top of my head, but I think that most of the actions in here are more like regional and state level actions. So I would be surprised if there wasn't at least some recognition of the need to improve sort of the infrastructure. But I don't remember off the top of my head right now.
There was some discussion about decentralizing the power generation network. And that kind of implies that they'd be less reliant on the current model.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of the things that as a local community, you don't really have a lot of, control or say over how that, or how that works.
Right.
Without that type of, what used to be around was having, smaller utilities, that may have picked up a couple different towns or things of that nature. It's interesting how the water, how water and sewer have, managed to, remain, relatively under local control. But electricity kind of got away from everybody.
Yeah, well, I think, in the beginning, they built the power plants as well and delivered it. So it made sense to have the big power plant that then delivered the power to a huge regional area. And then we deregulated and made that all a business, except for the transportation of the electricity, the distribution system.
One of the sections is to initiating a stakeholder process to transform Maine's electric power sector, to take a comprehensive look at transforming the state's electric sector, facilitate other recommendations of the Maine Climate Council. And it looks like they're going to be managing a process. The process will be managed by the governor's energy office with Maine Public Utilities Commission. And looking at things like utility structure, load management, data and information access, grid modernization and expansion, non-wire alternatives, interconnection, distributed energy resources, aggregation, equitable cost allocation, regional collaboration, changes in law and regulation. So it does look like it is something that's on the radar.
Good. That's good. Good to hear. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think in general, these are all the things we've been talking about. I would include that, we've also, as the GPC and this whole process has, worked towards raising the awareness of climate change, at least with those who are in our town that are paying attention and that we've been able to reach. So.
I think it's really positive that the state is committing to this action plan, and that it even has developed a climate action plan. A recent climate action plan. I think a lot of states and municipalities put together climate action plans quite a few years ago, and I think it's time for an update for some of those action plans, where there is an effort to kind of relook at how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions instead of only focusing on adaptation, which is important also, but reducing greenhouse gas emissions is kind of a critical part of being able to effectively adapt to climate change. So I think it is pretty promising that the state has put together something and is kind of committing to, this comprehensive approach.
And I'm impressed that the state's plan is so ambitious. They're trying to accomplish a great deal in a short period of time.
Gotta think big. Right. It's a big problem, so you got to attack it with a big plan, and if you achieve half of it, you're going to make good progress. Right. and hope that the scientists are a bit wrong and it's not as bad as they think, and you still make good progress. Or we make half the progress and it's actually worse than what they say. And
Okay, well, even if
yeah,
the scientists are right, you know, it's better to do something than to, you know.
yeah, no, for sure. Okay. All right, well, thank you for that. Any questions for Tom or Liz? Okay, so next up, public outreach update.
Liz, are you up for that?
Sure. Do you want to pull up, since you have your, oh, you don't have your screen shared. Let me share mine. All right, so we put together a handful of questions, and I don't know that we'll get through all of them by 8, but just stop us if you want to stop at 8, and if you want to keep going, we could keep going.
Okay.
And if we don't make it through all of them tonight, we could always send them out over email, and then you'll all have a chance to look at them before the next meeting, and we could kind of revisit. But this is a set of questions for mini survey number 3. I had mentioned at the last meeting wanting to ask a question about evacuation. So
yep.
This is question 1 here, proposed question 1. If you needed to evacuate due to a storm, extended power outage, or other reason, where would you go? Variety of options here.
Yep. Hotels. Yep, that's fine.
Any comments, questions about this? I guess friends doesn't need to be capitalized in letter E there. We can change that.
Yeah.
Would we put in the middle school, which is the designated?
We can specify, we could do that. I wrote a shelter, but we could put specifically the middle school. Sure.
Because maybe that would be an education tool in itself by saying that.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yep.
The next 2, would you have difficulty evacuating due to a lack of transportation? And then a follow-up, would someone you know have difficulty evacuating due to a lack of transportation? Maybe, you know, an elderly neighbor or someone you know without a vehicle who perhaps wouldn't be responding to this survey online.
Okay.
4th question, oh my gosh, mouse is out of control. Has flooding due to storm events and or high tides impacted you in any of the following ways? My property's been inundated by floodwater. A structure I rent or own, such as a home or business, has been damaged by floodwaters. My vehicle's been damaged. I've had to drive an alternate route due to a flooded roadway. Flooding has disrupted my business, or other.
Looks good.
Yep.
Okay. 5, is your property located within the FEMA 100-year floodplain? Yes, no, I don't know, or I don't own property in Kennebunkport.
Hey, Werner, should we, like, since this has been a topic for 10 years, should we specify which floodplain map?
I mean, we could, and that's one of those things, I've been we've been living with it for so long. I feel like everybody ought to know what the heck I'm talking about, and then run across, folks who don't get the nuances.
Yeah.
I think, so were you thinking, well, here's
Well,
one thing one thing that might be helpful is, you could include a link, maybe in that question, that takes you to the, to the mapping.
Yeah, that'll get them going.
That's a good idea.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah, I like that.
because I think there are folks who, if they're in that I don't know, yeah, maybe it's in that I don't know, and there's a link to go to the map to, to look it up. But
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
And in terms of distinguishing the two floodplains, we can use the word proposed for this one, right?
yeah, just because the digital products are so much easier to use to actually figure out if you're in or not. Trying to use the old 83 maps,
Yeah.
would render an awful lot of I don't knows.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, okay, so let's put it within the proposed FEMA 100-year floodplain.
Okay.
You could probably turn that right into the link.
Yeah.
All right.
Good.
The next question is, has your well water ever had high salinity? Yes, no, I don't know, or I don't have a well. We're planning, as you know, to have Dr. J. Knott come and talk about groundwater impacts due to sea level rise. And this is obviously one of the concerns is saltwater intrusion. So I'm kind of curious, and I think it would be interesting to see, if we do get a lot of yeses or a lot of nos. We don't obviously know where the location of the survey respondents is, but it would provide potentially some interesting data on that point.
Okay.
And then the last question, how familiar are you with sea level rise projections that have been issued by the Maine Climate Council? And we could put a link in there too, I think. Probably be a good
Yeah, that'd be
idea.
good. Yep.
Be an excellent place for a link.
And that was it.
Okay. Looks look good to me.
After we put the link in, everybody's going to answer B, somewhat familiar.
Yeah.
Good. Well, that's good.
So if there aren't any questions, or if anyone wants to go back, I can stop sharing my screen. That was the quickest survey question review ever.
So we're getting better at this.
Good job. Good questions. Anyone have?
Yeah, too.
I propose to go ahead and send it out.
Great. And we'll include another link just to make sure people can find the previous surveys if they haven't taken those yet.
Sounds good. Okay. Any other questions on the public outreach?
I'm good.
All right. Good. All right. So then next up is the review of minutes from March 16th. The only thing I wanted to do was to add another statement associated with our approval of the Pinnacle Hill, just to reference the the letter that Werner provided as having the information in it. So it gave some basis for why we made the decision. So I was going to add, and I'll provide this to Janet, based on this discussion and the information presented in the memo from Warner Gilliam to the GPC dated March 2nd, 2021. The GPC voted unanimously to move the Pinnacle Hill 2 property from the rural zone to the transition zone. The town of Kennebunkport growth area maps will be updated accordingly.
And let's attach the memo.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And we'll attach a memo. Other than that, I'm good with the, so I make a motion to accept the minutes as amended.
I'll second.
All right. Any discussion?
40 minutes.
What's that?
Do we have anyone taking minutes? We didn't.
Yeah, I took a bunch of notes. So,
Okay.
So yeah, so I'll prepare some from it instead of trying to give this to Janet and have her read my chicken scratch. So I'll do the minutes. So all in favor of the minutes?
Aye.
Jim or Mike? I hear an aye.
So,
All right, awesome. Okay, so that takes us to the last piece of the agenda. Next step, review chapter 14, fiscal capacity and capital investment strategies.
That'll be next meeting,
All right, which would be the 20th, right?
right?
And
All
we're
right.
also planning on talking about having a check-in on our summer outreach
Okay,
plan. Plan,
That's good.
maybe plan A and plan B.
Okay.
related to COVID and
Yeah, we hope to
looking ahead.
pick things up and engage more people, but we gotta kind of dance around the virus, you know?
yes, we do. Okay. Well, thank you all.
Right?
Very
Thank you.
good. Very informative meeting.
Thanks a lot. It was great.
Have a great night.
We'll take a motion, Jim.
I make a motion that we adjourn.
I'll second
second.
that. All right, I'll third it. All in favor?
Bye.
Aye, aye. All right,
Aye.
thank you all. Have a good week.